You're parked in the general spot. The military police officer's voice was sharp with the authority of someone enforcing base regulations. Arthur Williams, 72 years old and moving slowly after hip replacement surgery, stood beside his beat-up Ford sedan in the parking space directly in front of Fort Bragg's headquarters building. The spot was clearly marked, reserved, Base Commander General Morrison. And Williams' civilian vehicle, with its faded paint and visible rust, looked completely out of place. The MP, a specialist named Torres, was already radioing for a tow truck. "Sir, this is a reserved spot. Unauthorized parking in command-designated areas results in immediate impound and base access restriction. I need to see your ID." Williams handed over his Veterans Affairs card and driver's license, his weathered hands steady despite the confrontation. "If you believe some debts can never be fully repaid, type honor below." Arthur Williams had driven on to Fort Bragg for a medical appointment at the base clinic, one of the benefits of his veteran status. The parking lot had been full, typical for mid-morning, and he'd been circling for 15 minutes, his hip aching, his patience wearing thin. The reserved spot near the entrance had been empty, tempting. He'd made a judgment call that most people would consider poor, park there briefly, run in for his appointment, get out before anyone noticed. Except he'd been delayed, his appointment had run long, and now he stood watching an MP prepare to impound his vehicle while base personnel walked past, some shaking their heads at the audacity of a civilian taking the commander's spot. What Torres didn't know, what the passing soldiers didn't realize, was that Williams had every right to park in that spot. He just hadn't known it himself. Torres processed the impound paperwork with efficient professionalism, photographing the vehicle, documenting the violation, explaining that Williams would need to pay towing fees and potentially face a hearing about his base access privileges. Williams listened quietly, accepting the consequences with the resignation of someone who'd learned long ago that fighting authority rarely helped. "I apologize for the inconveniences, specialist. I shouldn't have parked there. My hip was bothering me and I made a poor choice." Torres nodded, his irritation fading slightly. At least this old guy was polite about it, unlike the officers who sometimes parked illegally and got indignant when caught. "Sir, I understand, but regulations are clear. This spot is reserved exclusively for General Morrison. Nobody else is authorized, regardless of circumstances." He completed the paperwork, called the tow truck, settled in to wait. 20 minutes later, a convoy arrived. 2 military vehicles pulling up behind Williams' sedan, the lead vehicle disgorging a 2-star general in working uniform. General James Morrison himself, the base commander, having been informed by his office staff that someone was being impounded from his parking spot. He approached expecting to find an entitled contractor or visiting VIP who'd ignored signage. Instead, he found an elderly veteran standing patiently beside an MP, waiting for a tow truck, the entire situation looking exactly like proper regulation enforcement. Torres came to attention immediately. "Sir, situation is handled. Civilian vehicle illegally parked in your designated spot. Impound is in progress." Morrison nodded, glanced at the sedan, then stopped. He looked again. The license plate, the veteran plates, something about them was familiar. Morrison stepped closer, examining the vehicle, then turned to Williams with an intensity that made Torres nervous. "Sir, what's your name?" Williams straightened slightly, old military bearing showing through civilian casualness. "Arthur Williams, sir. I apologize for parking in your spot. It won't happen again." Morrison's face had gone pale, a complicated mix of emotions playing across his features. He turned to Torres. "Specialist, cancel that impound immediately." Torres blinked. "Sir, regulations state—" Morrison cut him off, his voice carrying an edge that allowed no argument. "I said cancel it. This man is authorized to park in this spot. He's authorized to park in any spot on this base. He's authorized to park in my personal driveway if he chooses. Torres looked between them, confused, still holding the impound paperwork. Morrison gestured sharply. Tear that up. Now. The paperwork disappeared into Torres's pocket as Morrison approached Williams, who stood confused and slightly alarmed by the general's reaction. Arthur Williams. Sergeant Williams. You don't recognize me, do you? Morrison's voice had softened, become almost reverent. Williams squinted, trying to place the face, seeing only a general who seemed to know him from somewhere. Sir, I'm sorry, I don't... Morrison smiled sadly. October 1993. Mogadishu. You were a staff sergeant with the 10th Mountain Division, attached to the Rangers for support operations. I was 2nd Lieutenant Morrison, fresh out of West Point, in command of my 1st platoon. We got separated from our unit during the battle, took heavy fire. I was hit in the leg. Understanding dawned on Williams' face, memory rushing back. A young lieutenant, terrified and wounded, 18 soldiers trying to fight their way to safety through hostile streets. You pulled me into a building, Morrison continued, his voice thick with emotion. You took command, because I couldn't, because I was in shock and bleeding and convinced we were all going to die. You organized the defense, you stabilized my leg, you kept everyone alive for 11 hours until the rescue convoy reached us. You saved my life and the lives of 17 other soldiers that day. You were awarded the Silver Star. I was medevaced, spent 6 months in recovery, and by the time I could return to duty, you'd rotated stateside. I tried to find you, to thank you properly, but you'd left active service and disappeared into civilian life. Williams shifted uncomfortably, the memories clearly painful. That was a long time ago, sir. Different life. You've done well for yourself. General is impressive. Morrison shook his head firmly. I did well because you gave me the chance to do well. Every promotion, every command, every day I've worn this uniform for the past 32 years exists because you pulled me into that building and refused to let us die. Morrison turned to his aide, who'd been watching the exchange with wide eyes. Get me a new placard made for this parking spot. Name change. It's not mine anymore. He looked at Williams, his voice formal now, official. Sergeant Williams, effective immediately, this parking spot is redesignated in your name. Permanent authorization. You're also granted full base access with commander's authority. You need medical care, you park here. You want to visit, you park here. This is your spot now, understood? Williams tried to protest. Something about regulations, about it being unnecessary, about having already gotten too much recognition for just doing his job. But Morrison cut him off. Sir, with respect, you don't get to decline this. You gave me my life back. The least I can do is give you a parking spot. Torres stood frozen, watching a regulation enforcement turn into something he'd never witnessed. A general giving away his own designated space. The new placard was installed within an hour. Reserved, SSG Arthur Williams, Silver Star, Mogadishu, 1993. Morrison personally walked Williams to the base personnel office, ensuring his credentials were updated with commander's authorization, making it clear to every administrative person they encountered that Williams was to be treated with the highest courtesy. This man is a hero. He saved my life. If he needs anything, anything at all, you provide it or you answer to me personally. Williams endured the attention with embarrassed grace, clearly wishing he could disappear, clearly uncomfortable with praise for actions he considered simply doing his duty, but Morrison wouldn't relent, couldn't relent. The debt he felt too profound to be addressed with mere words. News of the incident spread through Fort Bragg with the speed of good gossip. Soldiers who'd seen Williams being processed for impound watched with confusion as he walked past, later with the base commander himself, his vehicle now parked legally in what had been the most prestigious spot on base. The story evolved in the telling. The old guy who'd illegally parked turned out to be the guy who saved the general's life in Mogadishu, who'd earned a Silver Star for valor, who'd been living quietly nearby for decades without ever mentioning his service or asking for recognition. Torres, the MP who'd started the impound, found Williams later to apologize. "Sir, I had no idea. I was just enforcing regulations." Williams shook his hand warmly. "You were doing your job correctly. That's important. The general and that's ancient history. You couldn't have known." Torres nodded, but he carried the lesson that every person you encounter might be carrying history you can't see, that enforcement must be balanced with awareness that rules don't capture every circumstance. Williams returned for his medical appointments, always parking in the spot that now bore his name, always uncomfortable with the attention it brought, but accepting it because Morrison had made it clear refusal wasn't an option. Over time, the spot became a teaching tool. New soldiers would see the name and ask about it. Senior NCOs would tell the Mogadishu story, the importance of recognizing that heroism doesn't announce itself, that the person you're about to impound might be the reason your commander wears stars. Morrison visited Williams regularly, maintaining a friendship that had started in blood and terror, that had been lost for decades, that had been rekindled over a parking violation. They'd have coffee, share stories, Morrison learning from Williams' perspective what those 11 hours had looked like to the sergeant, holding everything together while Morrison bled and young soldiers looked to them both for survival. Subscribe to my channel if you believe some debts transcend rank and time. Arthur Williams parked in a general's spot out of necessity and pain, unknowing that the general owed him a debt that could never be fully repaid. General Morrison spent 32 years searching for the sergeant who'd saved his life and found him facing impound for illegal parking. The story illustrates that heroism rarely announces itself, that the people who saved your life might be living quietly nearby without recognition or reward. That doing things right sometimes means rewriting the rules to acknowledge debts that regulations never considered. Williams didn't want a parking spot with his name on it. He didn't want recognition or special treatment. He'd done his duty in Mogadishu and moved on, considering his actions nothing special despite the Silver Star that said otherwise. But Morrison understood what Williams never would, that the gift of life demands acknowledgement, that debts of blood can't be ignored, that the least he could do was ensure Williams never had to circle a parking lot again. Honor those who save lives and then disappear into ordinary existence, who carry silver stars in drawers and park in regular spots, who consider extraordinary valor to be simply the job. They deserve more than parking spaces, but sometimes a parking space is where recognition begins.